Hey, this is Jamey with Stonemeyer Games, and today I'm going to talk about a game that I just played very recently with 3 players, Dune Imperium. This is a new game to come out from Dire Wolf this year. Dire Wolf is the creator of one of my favorite games, Clank, a wonderful deck building game that involves a little bit of dungeon diving, dungeon crawling, and deck building. But in this game, they combine deck building with worker placement. And I thought that was a little weird at first when I heard about the game. I was like, okay, I'd much rather just choose which spaces I can place my workers on instead of having my cards tell me what to do. But there's a reason the cards elevate worker placement in this game, among some other mechanisms that I'll mention here. Um, as you can see on these cards, this is my random hand of cards. There's some icons over here on the left side, and they show you where you are able to place workers. So on your turn, you'll choose one of these cards from your hand, you'll play it, and you'll place one of your workers on one of the eligible spots on the board for these categories. Which is good, which is fine. It's interesting. It's a nice way to build different cards in your hand so you have access to different types of actions on your turn. However, the thing that really elevates that and makes the cards tie to the worker placement so well is that you only have 2 workers to start out at the beginning of the game. You can get a third worker, and there's a bonus worker that you can, like a temporary worker that anyone can get. But usually it starts out for only 2. Maybe for part of the game, you will only have 2 workers, which means that you're only playing 2 of these cards per round. And therein lies the great element of the game, which is that the remaining cards in your hand at the end of the round become a resource that you use for other things. So if I've spent 2 of these cards, I'll have typically maybe 3 cards left over. And at the very bottom of those cards, you can't really see it in this picture. My thumb is covering it in this photo. Um, at the bottom of the card is either typically a resource that you can spend to buy more cards or a combat bonus, a fight resource, basically. And so as you are choosing the cards that you're going to use for worker placement, you are also choosing the cards you're going to have remaining to use at the end of the round for that special bottom of the card bonus. And you're not gaining, so then there are 2 interesting things that tie together with this. One, you're not gaining new cards during the round. You're doing all this other stuff on the board. You're gaining resources. You're gaining influence. You're getting some other types of cards, but you're not gaining these core deck building cards for your deck during the round. You're only doing that once per round, and that's at the end of the round when you are done doing worker placement and you're ready to discard some cards. The other aspect of that, so I think that's really cool. The other aspect of that I really like is the combat. So are you going to choose to wait to the end of the round and choose cards for buying more cards, or are you going to choose to save cards that will make you better in combat? Because at the end of every round is a fight for any players who have opted into moving any troops into the fight area of the board. And that's the other part of this video that I want to talk about. Actually, there's 2 other parts. I really enjoyed a lot of mechanisms in this game. It's a little hard to see here. There is a photo here. You can check out other videos that describe how combat works. But a few highlights of this, just real quick. One, at the beginning of every round, you flip a card over, you flip a combat card or conflict card over, and that tells you what you're fighting over. So it shows if you win the fight, if you win the combat for that round, it only happens once at the end of the round. If you win it, it shows you what you get. And it also shows you what you get if you're second place in a third player game, or even third place in a 4-player game. So I like that the stakes are different every round, the things that you're fighting over. It's usually getting you some points, it's getting you some maybe some resources, maybe control of a certain area of the board. It really depends on the card. So it's a little different from game to game. And this deck escalates over the course of the game. I think there's like phase 1 cards, 2, and 3. The number of troops that you commit to combat during the round determine A, if you can even participate in combat at all, because if you don't have any troops in combat, you're not going to participate in that round's combat. And B, you know for sure that those troops are going to die, essentially. They're going to be removed from the board. And so it's a really tough decision during the round to decide how many troops you want to put in there, and you're constantly paying attention to how many troops other players are putting in there. I was playing red here. I think you can kind of see 3 red cubes here, 1 green cube. But at any time, a player could pass and end the round and go and buy cards or have extra combat value. You don't know when it's going to happen. And so you're constantly paying attention to how many other players are putting cubes in there for combat. Also, there are these intrigue cards that you can get during the game. So one of the factions, I'll go into this in a second, but one of the faction helps you And a couple of different actions help you get these intrigue cards, which are completely secret to you, and they are often used for combat, but they are used for other things too. So even though a player has a handful of intrigue cards, you don't know if they're for combat or if they're for something else. They might be saving those cards for end of game scoring, or for for a plot bonus during the round when they're placing workers. So all these things, it maybe sounds a little complicated. Combat is not all that complicated, but it is intensely satisfying because all these things you have control over go into combat where you have a little bit of uncertainty. You don't know what the intrigue cards your opponents will have, but you do have a lot of information, a lot of agency going into it. And so you're there's this wonderful push and pull that ties to these cards that you have left over, how much fight you're going to commit from the cards into combat, even though the troops are actually worth more in terms of combat value. There's one little moment that doesn't fit into any of these categories that I want to mention that happened in the game, which was I mentioned how you buy cards at the end of every round if you have some resource to spend. And the cards that come up, there are a few set cards and there are a bunch of random cards as well. I think 5 face-up random cards. And every now and then, some of those cards will be super powerful, more expensive and super powerful, and even have benefits that you gain when you get them. And there was a card that was revealed kind of midway through the game that was super powerful. It gave a player 1 influence in every category, which I'll mention in a second. I'll go into influence. 1 influence in every category if they obtained that card. And it created a situation where a player decided, even though they had an extra worker to place, they decided to pass because they didn't want any other player to take that card, and they wanted to make sure they had enough resources on the cards remaining in their hand to actually be able to afford that card. So I love that it was a round that was full of tension simply because a single card came out that we all really wanted, and we could all only afford it if we passed a little early and had extra cards in our hand with that resource to spend. So that's another reason why I think the cards tied really well into the worker placement and just the mechanisms of the game. The last thing I have to mention, even though I've talked about a lot of stuff in this video, is the influence system, which you can see over here. Basically, when you place a worker on one of the 4 factions in the game, or not 4 factions, but 4... yeah, I'll call them factions. That's the closest thing I can say, I think. 4 different things that you can influence. You're placing a worker either on one that is very easy to place on and another that's a lot more expensive. So I like how there's these 2 different options here. The more expensive one, actually this one's pretty cheap, but they get more expensive as you go up on this track. And by having like a cheap option for each of them and a more expensive one, it gives you something to work towards for the expensive one. But it also means that every round, some players are definitely going to be using these cheaper spots to influence the different factions. I like that a lot. I won't go into entirely how this influence system works. It is really cool. But the thing I really love about it is that when you place your worker here, you are doing something wholly unique to that faction. And so even though I know nothing about Dune, I've only read a few chapters of the book. I haven't seen any of the movies. I'm excited about the new movie, but I haven't seen it. I think no one has until next year. But I love that each faction's, the things that you do and that you gain from each faction are very different. This faction is kind of about water and territorial control. They give you access to a new territory on the map when you reach a certain level. There's another one that gives you the intrigue cards. They're kind of mysterious. And they actually also let you trash cards from your deck. There's another one that gives you a bunch of resources, a bunch of money, or a bunch of cubes, a bunch of soldiers. They're kind of the military faction, but they also have this awesome card. I forget what the card is called, but it gives you access. You put it into your deck and you gain access to any actions on the board. And the top guys, the Emperor, they give you a bunch of money. They're the ones that give you money. And I think money is the main thing there that they give you. But each one felt really unique and different. So even though I knew nothing about the theme of Dune, as I played the game and learned about these different factions, I really felt like I was engaging in the theme of the game. So I think they did a fantastic job of making the influence system in the game feel very thematic, instead of just having you move up on a track, kind of abstractly influencing different factions. This is a very long video for one of these style of videos, but I wanted to go deeper into these mechanisms because I thought they were so well designed and so well integrated with each other, leading to a ton of interesting decisions throughout this game. I really enjoyed my play of Dune Imperium, and I can't wait to play again. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you've played Dune Imperium or if these mechanisms remind you of anything else that you played in another game, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks.